24th at 9:05 a.m. Meeting's called to order. I'm Felicia Marcus, I'm the chair of the board. To my left is Vice Chair Franz Spivey Weber. To her left, Board Member Didi Diadamo. To my right, Board Member Tam Dodek. And to her right, Board Member Steve Moore. I always get nervous doing that. I think I'm going to get it wrong. It's weird. Mr. Howard, who's assisting you today?
Today it's just Chief Counsel Michael Lawfer. I seem to have lost my two chief deputies. And Janine Townsend and Courtney Davis are assisting the board.
Okay, terrific. Emergency evacuation, for those of you who don't know it, take a look at the nearest exit. If you're an emergency sound, proceed safely with your stuff out of here. We go downstairs and to Cesar Chavez Park. Our assembly area is towards 9th and J. Go there if you want to know when the all clear sounds and come back with us. The meeting is being webcast and recorded, and that puts a fine point on a couple of things. One is, please put your electronic devices off or on silent. And when you come to the microphone, it's important to speak into it very closely, almost uncomfortably. And even though we might be able to hear you, the people on the webcast will not, unless you do. I have this one clipped to my lapel just because I find it difficult to do. So I know wherever I speak, it's hard to stay close to it as you speak, but we really want people to be able to hear everything it is that you have to say. I think that's the basics. We're going to move to item number 14. And Michael, I know I have a, what? Are we here? We were doing this, so I thought maybe there was something else that I forgot.
Could we, Madam Chair, could we quickly do the Executive Director's Report, item 13?
You want to do it first?
Yes, mine will be very fast,
Okay, go ahead.
since we postponed it from yesterday.
We did. I was going to do it at the end of the meeting. Gosh, I don't have notes. I don't have, go ahead. Here, we'll take one.
I guess my microphone, I need to get much closer before they clip a portable one on me.
That's right.
Just thank you to Mr. Howard for including the cost of compliance update in your Executive Director's Report as I requested at the last board meeting. In looking through that, I wanted to particularly point out action item number 5. It is a bit different than what the POTW task stakeholder group recommended, and a bit different than our response in the resolution that the board adopted. Not that I'm opposed to the difference, but my suggestion is when you feel the time is appropriate, and sooner rather than later, please do connect back with the leads of the cost of compliance stakeholder group for the POTWs, and just sort of communicate with them the change in direction, why that is, and I would encourage you to, as soon as you can and as soon as US EPA feels comfortable, to share what you are discussing, the draft plan with them, and get their input, since it is a bit different than the direction that we originally committed to in the resolution the board adopted. And then did you want to respond to that?
No,
okay.
that's fine.
And then my second comment is to thank you and the underground storage tank staff for the great work you did in closing. I think it was like 1,300 underground storage tank site the last fiscal year, and reducing the petition backlog. It was something that was very important to the board. We adopted several resolutions on that matter, and it's great to see implementation, follow through, and accomplishment. So thank you, and kudos to all the staff at the state board, regional board, as well as our local partners in accomplishing that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And the closure policy has been very helpful in that regard, and so thank you for that.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. The Executive Director's Report sort of highlights just how much is going on, and not all of it comes before the board in regular session. So I really appreciate you acknowledging that, particularly because it is such a significant effort, as are other things, and that way hopefully staff will also acknowledge that we know what's going on, even if it's not coming to the board right in front of us all the time, and acknowledging what's going well is crucially important. So thank you. We shall do that more. I appreciate that. All right. Let's move to item 14. Yeah, the presentation first, and I have a couple things to say before the public comment.
You're not on.
Diane Riddle will present the item, which is a petition for reconsideration of temporary urgency change petition orders that were signed by May.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. Again, I'm Diane Riddle. I'm the program manager for the Hearings and Bay Delta program. And again, I'll be presenting on the petitions for reconsideration of the temporary urgency change order related to modifications of Delta requirements starting in January of this year. First, I'll start with a brief summary of what the order does. It responds to the major comments, protests, petitions for reconsideration, objections that we received on the original order and the various modifications that were made to that order over time. The order finds that all of the decisions made by the executive director were appropriate given the information available at the time and the situation at the time. In addition, the order proposes new conditions to ensure better planning, coordination, and transparency for the remainder of the drought, which we think is the key component of the draft order. So for a little bit of background, as you may recall, we originally received the petition on January 29th from the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation requesting modifications to Delta outflows and Delta cross-channel gate closure requirements, and also proposing modifications in export limits when those relaxations were in place. The executive director approved the temporary urgency change petition on January 31st. Those changes were effective through February, or for the month of February. Subsequently, due to changed circumstances, rainfall events, and additional requests, we modified the order again on 6 additional times on February 7th, 28th, March 18th, April 9th, and 11th, and May 2nd. Those additional orders added additional modifications, including changes to San Joaquin River flow requirements, Rio Vista flow requirements, and Western Delta salinity requirements. So the order responds to various petitions for reconsideration from the above parties. There's 8 of those. In addition, we received numerous comments and objections and protests from additional parties. We received several from the same parties as we made the various modifications. And all of those parties and the dates at which they submitted their correspondence to us are included in attachment 2 to the draft order. So for the most part, the various comments respond to the different issues that are required, the findings that are required for the temporary urgency change petition to be approved, including that there is an urgent need for the change, that there will be no injury to other lawful users of water from the change, that there will not be unreasonable effects on fish, wildlife, or other in-stream beneficial uses, and that the change is in the public interest. And briefly, I'll go over the grounds for reconsideration. There are 4 different grounds for reconsideration: irregularity in the proceedings or abuse of discretion by which the person was prevented from having a fair hearing, on the grounds that the order is not supported by substantial evidence, on the grounds that there is irrelevant evidence which, in the exercise of reasonable diligence, could not have been produced, or on the grounds that there was an error in law. In response to the petitions for reconsideration, the board may refuse to reconsider the order. The board may deny the petition upon a finding that the decision or order was appropriate and proper, or the board may set aside or modify the order. So the overarching issue addressed in many of the comment letters centered around the issue of whether the changes were in the public interest or not. Primarily, the comments centered around whether the orders adequately constrained operations enough to avoid unreasonable impacts on fish, wildlife, and other beneficial uses of water, or that the orders constrained operations too much and caused unreasonable impacts to water supplies. Also, a theme amongst many of the comments was that the various changes were needed due to a lack of planning for drought circumstances. So the draft order responding to the petitions for reconsideration and the various comments finds that the various approvals that the executive director made were in the public interest, given the circumstances at the time, and the fact that the drought had significantly reduced water supplies for all users, requiring difficult decisions in a short time frame. The order finds that the executive director's decisions appropriately balance the water supply needs this year and next for fish and wildlife and water supply purposes. The draft order also finds that additional changes should be made to the order to ensure that additional necessary changes that may be needed in the future continue to be in the public interest. Specifically, those additional conditions that are proposed in the draft order are to require the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources to develop a water year 2015 drought contingency plan, a requirement that the Bureau of Reclamation take various actions to reduce impacts to winter run Chinook salmon and consider winter run in planning decisions, a requirement that the projects consult on a weekly basis with the fish agencies and the board regarding operational decisions that may affect Endangered Species Act listed fish and wildlife species and other beneficial uses of water, and that the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources report to the board monthly on their drought operations. Also included in the condition related to the Bureau of Reclamation related to protection of winter run Chinook salmon is a requirement that the Bureau of Reclamation report on operations related to winter run. In addition, the draft order proposes to require the projects to provide earlier reporting on the water balance and the water conserved under the draft order than was previously required. The proposal originally was to modify it from 30 days following the end of the month to 10 days. We'll have a change sheet related to that reduces this a little bit more. Other comments that we received related to whether the need for the changes was urgent or not. And many of those comments suggested that the changes should have been made through the standard process rather than the temporary urgency change petition process. The draft order finds that given the circumstances, there was an urgent need for the various changes to ensure the protection of water supplies for future uses and ensure prevention of saltwater intrusion. And the other issue that the order addresses is that the board could not have considered approval of the changes before Water Code Section 13247 was suspended. That's the requirement that the board fully implement water quality control plans, because the changes that were made in the temporary urgency change orders were implementation of a water quality control plan. We would not been able to make those changes until that water code section was suspended. Other comments that we received pertain to whether the proposed change would injure lawful users of water. The primary arguments that were made there was that allowing for increases in salinity would cause injury to other legal users of water, and that the conditions constraining exports would cause injury to other legal users of water. The draft order finds that other water right holders other than the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation are only entitled to flow to which they legally have a right, and not to releases of previously stored water or to better water quality than would have existed absent those reservoir releases. The order, with respect to the export concerns, the order finds that the Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Water Resources contractors are not entitled to more water than the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources can legally deliver to their contractors under their water rights. We also received a number of different comments related to whether the order had unreasonable effects on fish and wildlife and other in-stream beneficial uses of water. Specifically, comments were received that changes to delta outflows, delta cross-channel gate closure operations, San Joaquin River flows, export limitations, and western delta salinity caused unreasonable effects on fish and wildlife. The draft order and the orders approved by the executive director acknowledge that there may have been effects on fish and wildlife and other in-stream beneficial uses, but finds that those effects are reasonable given the balance between water supply needs this year and next, and water supply needs for people and for fish. The draft order finds that the proposed conditions that I went over earlier will help to ensure the reasonable protection of fish and wildlife into the future. There were a number of additional issues that were raised in the petitions that are addressed in the draft order, including issues related to whether the board and the executive director's authorities under Water Code Section 1435, which is the temporary urgency change petition provision. Comments related to the real-time drought operations management team, whether the board adequately responded to comments in a timely fashion, whether hearing was required, ex parte communications, and CEQA issues. I won't go into each of those specific issues unless you would like me to. Just briefly, the draft order finds that all of these additional arguments lack merit in response to the various issues. So we received several comments, 11 comments on the draft order that was released on September 3rd from the various parties listed above. I won't summarize each of those. Instead, I'll let the commenters go ahead and summarize those. In response to the comments, we determined that some potential changes should be made to the draft order. Those are included on change sheet number 1. In addition to those changes listed on change sheet number 1, staff also proposes to make minor non-substantive corrections to the order to reflect the different changes that were made here and some just grammatical mistakes and other issues. So briefly going through the proposed change sheet, the change sheet includes 3 modifications to footnotes. First, we're proposing to add a footnote to clarify the reconsideration process after the 90-day window has passed. We're proposing, in response to comments from the Folsom contractors, we're proposing to modify a footnote to clarify issues they raised. In response to comments from NRDC and California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, we're proposing to clarify a footnote related to the presence of spring run Chinook salmon in the Stanislaus River. In addition, we're also proposing various modifications to the conditions in the ordering section. in response to comments from the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation that the time frame for submittal of the water balance and accounting of water conserved under the change was too short, we're proposing to modify that time frame from 10 days after the end of the month to 20 days after the end of the month. In response to comments that we received from NRDC and CISPA, we're proposing to discuss fall run Chinook salmon and issues that should be consulted on related to project operations on a weekly basis with the State Water Board and the fishery agencies. With respect to the drought contingency plan, we're proposing to add a requirement that the biological justification for the plan be identified in the plan. We're also proposing to add some specificity with respect to the percent exceedance that the plan should look at. Specifically, we're proposing at least 50 and 90% hydrologies. In response to comments that we got from the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Water Resources, that the original due date for the drought contingency plan of October 15th was too early, we're proposing to require that 2 versions of the plan be produced such that we're starting the planning process early, but at the same time acknowledging that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen later in the season. So for the first quarter of 2014 or water year 2015, we're proposing that the plan be submitted by October 15th beyond for the period up to January 15th. From January 15th and beyond, we're proposing that that plan be submitted by January 15th, which was, that was the date by which the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Water Resources felt they could prepare such a plan. In addition, we're proposing to add a condition to require that the plan be updated. We acknowledge that conditions may change and are likely to change and that we may need to revisit our decisions, so we've included that condition. Related to condition 12, the Sacramento River Winter Run Chinook Salmon Temperature Management Plan. In response to comments from the Bureau of Reclamation, we're proposing to change the due date from December 1st to January 15th. We're also proposing to add consideration of fall run Chinook salmon in response to comments that we got from NRDC. So, in conclusion, the order found, again, that the order approved by the executive director and the various modifications to that order were consistent with applicable law and were supported by substantial evidence. And as a result, the petitions for reconsideration should be denied. The draft order also finds that additional conditions should be added to the order to ensure better planning, coordination, and transparency for the remainder of the drought. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I can take those now.
Are there questions to start? Let's get into it and see what folks were very thoughtful in their comments. Sorry, I just have to have all my papers here. Before I start, particularly since the issue of ex parte contacts have come up, so in an abundance of extra appearance caution, would that be the way to put it? Not necessarily necessary, but last week board member Diadamo and I met with representatives of Friant Water Authority concerning another topic. During the meeting, issues of water rights priority were raised in the context of CVP operations. Specifically, as seen some of the comments, comment that Bureau shouldn't be delivering water to junior contractors until the exchange contractors' senior contract rights have been satisfied, and their opinion about the coordinated operations agreement violating the Bureau's senior contract rights. Although it appears to be inadvertent and the draft order on reconsideration dismisses these issues as not relevant to the temporary urgency change petition, the issues raised by the Friant representatives could be considered impermissible ex parte communications, so I am disclosing them in an abundance of caution. let's move to the public testimony. Yeah, I think 5 minutes because this stuff is complicated. It's good. All right. First up, Jennifer Buckman from Front Water Authority.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of
morning.
the board. As we just discussed, I'm the General Counsel for Front Water Authority, and I'm here today with some representatives from the Valley because we have grave concern about the unintended consequences of the orders approving the TUCP and the de facto approval of the Drought Operations Plan. As you all know, Friant represents 15,000 small family farmers, average farm size of about 200 acres. But in addition to that, Friant also supports the rural communities that have grown up around those businesses. And that aspect of Friant's operations was overlooked last year. And it's had some dire consequences on the ground, as my colleagues will attest to. The permits issued for the Friant division include both irrigation and M&I as authorized uses. And in fact, the M&I was assured to be reliable by virtue of being given Class 1 preferential contracts under the CBP. And that's consistent with both D-935, the decision issued by this board, and the United States Supreme Court decision in City of Fresno. That's how they addressed the M&I uses within the Friant division at the time. To authorize a drought plan that doesn't provide any supply at all for those communities is simply unworkable for us. These people rely on that water. They need it. We have folks who have homes with no water service now. I'm not going to restate the objections we have to the TUCP. We've documented all of those in writing. We will just ask you to remember that it is the obligation of this board to enforce the laws it's charged to enforce, including the prior appropriation doctrine. And had the senior water rights that Friant relies on been protected through the last year, those people wouldn't be in that situation here today. So we urge you to take the action that's appropriate to protect the senior water rights on which these rural communities rely. We also, just in going over the conditions and the report that Ms. Riddle just did an excellent job summarizing for you all, would ask that there be some time allowed for folks to make written comments on the modifications to the order. Some of those don't, the engineers are whispering in my ear that some of those we may want to comment on, but there hasn't been really an opportunity for us to do so since they were released late. So that's all.
So comments on the changes in
Correct.
particular.
If we could be allowed a chance for written comments on the changes that came out a couple of days ago. And I understand the time pressure. That's not a criticism of the board staff. I understand the time pressure everyone's working under. I just ask that we be allowed an opportunity to respond.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
I have some questions, but, well, for staff, just might be helpful on the legal context of all of it and what our levers are here. Do you want to give that context for folks who are listening?
Sure. Well, I can summarize how the
Question, right.
Dana Heinrich with the Office of Chief Counsel. I can summarize how the draft order addresses the issues raised by Friant Water Authority. Essentially, their issue concerned the allocation of CBP water among CBP contractors, and their position is that if that the San Joaquin River Exchange contractors have a senior contractual priority, and they should have been given their 75% of their allocation, which would have obviated the need for water to be released from Friant to satisfy the exchange contractors, which in turn adversely affected Friant Water Authority. And they also argued that the way the coordinated operations agreement between the two projects divides exports between the CBP and the SWP was inconsistent with the Bureau of Reclamation's direct diversion rights for the Delta. And they argued that that in turn adversely affected CVP allocations and indirectly adversely affected them. The response in the draft order to these arguments is that really the TUCP order did not touch upon those two issues. It didn't mandate how water was to be allocated between CVP contractors, with the limited exception in the original order. There was language limiting exports to health and safety needs. That was later relaxed to some extent, but there was certainly no determination as to whether water should be given higher priority to the exchange contractors versus CVP wildlife refuges, for example. And likewise, the order didn't address how exports should be divided between the two projects. So we really didn't think that the issues raised by Friant were addressed in the order. So,
Yeah, and the context, oh, sorry, I have to talk this way. The context moving forward, that is an issue dealt with through the Bureau. I'm just trying to figure out, I get that in terms of the petition, but
right.
given that the issue's raised, I'm wondering where the issue gets resolved best.
Well, presumably and hopefully first between the CVP contractors and the Bureau of Reclamation. Those were issues that are addressed both in the drought operations plan that the project's prepared for this year, and allocations between contractors were addressed in that plan, and exports are addressed in the coordinated operations agreement. So we would hope that the projects could work those issues out with their contractors. If there is a water right allocation issue as opposed to a contractual allocation issue, that is something that conceivably could be taken up by the board if a complaint were to be filed. But I would hope that the projects and the contractors could work things out themselves. That would be ideal. But at any rate, we didn't feel like it was an issue that was raised in the context of the TUCP.
And we would just submit that it should have been. That when the board adopts a water quality control plan, or in this case amends a water quality control plan, we believe it's the obligation of the board, as announced in the D1641 appellate decision, to determine how those obligations should be shared amongst the water rights holders. So we feel it should have addressed the question of priority. And also, I mean, to the extent it's approving the drought plans, and the drought plans don't follow the law of priority, we just have a fundamental problem with that. There are two, Ms. Heinrich did a good summary of a couple of our points, but we also have another point that I think sometimes gets lost in the fray, which is there is a priority within the CVP permits themselves. And of those CVP permits, Friant and Contra Costa hold the most senior permits as issued by the board.
So I have a question about the 1500 CFS for health and safety. I know that some Friant contractors were able to obtain municipal water, but that 1500 CFS, I suspect, would have just provided relief for those getting water, moved south of Delta. So could you help put that in better context?
We didn't constrain how the 1500 CFS was to be used. That was a decision made by the Department and Bureau, and was according to their submittal of information concerning their minimum health and safety needs, more than adequate to meet those various needs. So how they allocated the supplies between the different contractors, I think, is an issue potentially between the contractors and the Bureau of Reclamation.
Did your contractors have access to that water?
No. We were overlooked in that allocation. The water that we got that you're referring to, Member D'Adamo, is water that had been, because it was one of the years that restoration flows are not granted under the San Joaquin River settlement. It was water that didn't go to the river. I think it was a total of about 13,000 acre feet. But we didn't get any of the 1500 CFS. We got nothing. That's why Porterville's in such sorry shape right now.
Thank you. Thanks. speaking of Porterville, Sean Guyvet, manager of Porterville, Sausalito, and Terabella Irrigation Districts.
Good morning.
Thank
Yes.
you for joining us.
I just want to give you a bit of understanding of what your decisions have led to in the Porterville area. And this conversation was interesting in that a 1,500 CFS allocation in the Delta doesn't mean anything to Porterville Irrigation District. Understand that the Delta supplies the exchange contractors, who are the senior water rights holder on the San Joaquin River. Their water then is backed up in Millerton, and in all years in the past 62 years, except last year, has been delivered to the Friant contractors. Last year, as a result of decisions, we got zero. And so the way it works in Porterville, we've always got class 1, and in Porterville, we have open ditches. So we run our water to our growers. It allows them to shut their pumps off and conserve the groundwater, and protects the domestic water users. Understand that Porterville's about 13,000 acres, mostly small farms. These are people that live on the farm, so we have small units, 20 and 40 acres with a home on them. They typically have a domestic well and an irrigation well. And so what's happened, with no surface water coming into the area, the domestic wells have all gone dry. And so we have over 55 homes that have been out of water for probably the past 3 months. Hottest, driest months of the year. No water to brush teeth. They're not washing dishes. They're not taking showers. It's a very difficult situation. And so I would just ask that as you guys deal with this difficult situation, that you keep in mind the Central Valley Project, and the Friant Division in particular, was designed to have surface water every year. It's built on the most senior water rights in the project. And if we have damaged the project so bad that the foundational water that goes to the exchange contractors to actually make the project a project can't be met, then I think we need to reevaluate the decisions we're making. Thank you. I'd answer any questions you have.
No, thank you. This is, folks explained to me last week how it works. So the issue isn't from the Porterville situation standpoint, which you know our Division of Drinking Water is working on trying to be helpful in that. So the other arm of the Water Board is trying to be helpful in that with the tools we have. Does that mean that it's not just about getting water to Porterville domestic systems? It would be that Friant would need enough allocation for it to go across the farm so that the water would infiltrate back into the groundwater. So that's more than just the health and safety needs of the community that would have to run in order to solve the problem under the plumbing that's there right now.
That's exactly my point.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
In
understand.
Porterville, I don't deliver any domestic water.
Right.
I deliver irrigation water. And so
Okay.
when my landowners started to go out, their wells started to go out, I did a lot of thinking about, well, what can I do? And the conclusion I've come to is that I can fight to get surface water to provide to the farmers. And in that way, it conserves the groundwater and provides domestic water to the residents that live in the district. Terabella is a little different. We have a surface water treatment plant there, no groundwater, so that, the Bureau made a very small amount of M&I water available to Terabella. Wasn't enough to meet our needs, but through the river restoration water that Jenny spoke of, we bought at a very high price some of that water to cover our M&I needs. But it's just the realization I've had that it's really an integrated system, and to try to point out, there are our domestic users, it's not always that simple.
Thank you. That's helpful, helping me understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Barcelos? Tell me if I pronounce that right or wrong. Thanks.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman.
Good morning.
Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to you here today. My name is Tom Barcelos. I'm the owner-operator of Barcelos Farms and T-Bar Dairy. My operation is located 14 miles west of Porterville. And our primary objective is to produce a wholesome product for the community and for the world. The dairy industry, from the east side standpoint, produces 12% of the milk in the United States. So we're talking about a food issue based on Friant water. And as we utilize the water, as Sean stated, I don't have adequate wells to irrigate all my land because we've always had surface water in the past. And in the past, as we've irrigated, naturally that water's infiltrated into the underground and provided a water supply for all of our rural communities, our rural schools, Tulare, Delano, Poplar, Woodville, I mean, I could go on, but hundreds of thousands of individuals who get their drinking water from the underground. And the availability of water to agriculture has provided that backup resource. I also sit on the board of Lower Tule Irrigation District, and we have many recharge basins that in past years, for the last 50 years since it's been in existence, we have taken additional water when available and put it into those recharge basins, and therefore there was a lot of wells that did not need to be drilled. Situations have changed dramatically. With a zero allocation this past year, we have not had any surface water whatsoever. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but what I am telling you that it's far more extensive, and it's going to be a very long time before this issue gets resolved. We just were able to drill a new well, and we had to go 680 feet because it's an animal welfare issue for my dairy cows. They can't go half a day without water. And I challenge anybody you know, to go 24 hours without any kind of water at all. Last May, we came home from my niece's wedding, and my son-in-law's house was out of water. Thank goodness we had the wherewithal and the facilities. We were able to take a sanitary stainless tank to their house, put on a little booster pump. We have a stainless tank. We deliver water to that, and we were able to secure their livelihood for a period of time until we were able to lower the pump that was in that well. Thank goodness there was some additional space to go down. However, that remains a temporary situation. My other son-in-law in Tulare, which is about 25 miles away, so this is not isolated to Porterville, also lost water in his well. The exact same scenario played out. The difference was, as we were lowering that one, there was a lady came from across the street and said she hadn't had water for 3 months and wanted to know how we managed to get somebody out there. I says, I have a good relationship with the pump company. As soon as we finished my son-in-law's, we went across the street and had them lower hers. However, hers was at the bottom with just one joint, with a 21-foot joint. So she's only buying a little bit of time. This situation, first rain, first snow, will not be resolved. We need to have water running in the surface ditches so we can get back in the recharge basins to try to make immediate impact on the groundwater. And the way to do that is to work with everybody, federal and state, to try to accommodate some of the east side needs, because this is going to play out in a very, very large area in a very short time. And we're going to be dealing with this until this time next year. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to come all the way up
Thank you.
here. It's helpful. Mark Odsouther, Superintendent, Pleasant View School District.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you.
I'll start by saying I'm just excited to be in front of people that will listen. This problem for me has gone back the last few months, and I represent not only Pleasant View Elementary School District outside of Porterville, but I also represent the 30 small school districts that are in consortium in Tulare County that work closely together. There's 44 school districts in Tulare County. 30 of them are small and rural that are dependent upon their own water supplies. We've been monitoring our well for the last 3 months. We've been losing about a foot a week. During the summer months, we had nobody on campus. We had no reason for use, and so we cut back dramatically, and still we're losing water. It flattened out a little bit, and then all of a sudden, the last week or two, we've started to lose more wheat. We've got more and more. We've lost about 2.5 feet in the last week. We've got about 25 feet left to the bottom of our well, but we're one of just many in Tulare County. There are school districts that are impacted in the same way. I don't claim to know a lot about what it is, the issues that you're tasked to deal with. I know from my point of view what I have to deal with and what small school district superintendents have to deal with is to find the resources that we can, to the best of our ability, to provide what our kids need on a daily basis. In 2 reports in the last 10 years, the east side of Tulare County and Kings County have been listed as the most impoverished in the nation. We're known in California as the forsaken 5%. And the kids I deal with on a daily basis, and I've seen it in the education system far too often, get left behind. And it's one of the things that I believe, especially at Pleasant View, that we're in the process of working towards changing that and really being a model for school reform. Not only for the kids at Pleasant View, but for kids of poverty throughout the nation. The problem is going to lie if I can't provide them the basic fundamental services that kids in other areas are afforded to. I believe this strikes at an issue of equity. The Pleasant View Elementary School District has 87% of our kids receiving direct assistance. 100% are free and reduced lunch. Very common throughout Tulare County. I talked to a superintendent last night who they put in a well in August, came online in August with an 80,000 gallon tank for fire suppression. They're at the bottom of the tank, they're at the bottom of their well as of yesterday. So there's no quick fix to this. I get it. But the problem is for me is I've talked with drillers. If I were to put in a new well, not only does that take the money away from the resources that I need to provide a high quality education that kids in other areas get, the problem is that it'll take 6 to 8 months to get the well dug, on top of the fiscal resources that I need to do it, which is cost prohibitive to a lot of schools, small schools in Tulare County. And I don't think the issue lies just within Tulare County. But I can only speak to that. So for us, even if we were to dig a well, like in Palo Verde's case, there's no guarantee that that well wouldn't be dry within a few months and we'd have to go deeper and again allocate more of the school resources that are set aside for providing our kids with the tools they need to be successful and kids that in other higher socioeconomic areas get fundamentally. So to me, for this is an issue of equity. I know everybody has their angle in this and they're coming from this from different directions. But I can only speak from where my heart lies, and which is to provide that education for the kids of Tulare County. And it's difficult to do that if they don't have the resources available to them that I know growing up in another area in another state that I had available to me on a daily basis.